By the time Lenora Vale was brought into the hall of red glass, every noble daughter in the kingdom had already been measured, appraised, and displayed beneath the chandeliers. They stood in pale silks and silver jewels, with ancient family crests sewn in seed pearls along their sleeves. While Lenora wore mourning black that had been cut down from her dead mother's dress and altered by her own patient hands until it barely passed for court attire. The hem had been darned twice. The collar was plain. No rubies burned at her throat, no diamonds nested in her hair. She carried poverty about her the way other women carried perfume. And that was precisely why Lord Maris of the Eastern March had insisted she be presented last. "A lesson," he had said with smiling cruelty before the procession began. So the court remembers what a bride looks like when a bloodline has rotted into dust. Lenora had bowed because pride was expensive and her house had none left to spend. The hall of red glass was built for awe and submission. Moonlight entered through towering stained panes the color of old wine, drowning the marble floor in blood-dark reflections. At the far end, above 7 black steps, stood the throne of the vampire king. Severin Dashan did not move when she was announced. He sat with one gloved hand against the armrest, his face white as carved winter stone, his dark hair falling with deliberate disorder about his brow. He wore no crown. He had never needed one. The court itself bent around him like shadow around a blade. Ancient, still, unreadable, he seemed less a sovereign than the memory of one, preserved in ice and law. Lenora kept her gaze lowered. She knew the stories. He had ruled for 3 centuries. He had ended 3 wars without raising his voice. He had condemned men with a glance and spared enemies with a silence more frightening than wrath. No mortal bride had ever lasted long in his court. Some were married off to lesser lords. Some left unchanged. A few vanished into history so gently that no one dared ask where they had gone. Tonight, the noble families had gathered to offer daughters under coven law, old treaties wrapped in velvet ceremony. If the king chose, he could mark one publicly and bind her to the throne. No one expected him to choose Lenora Vale. That was the point. Lord Maris stepped forward with theatrical pity. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice gliding through the hall, House Vale, once respectable, now reduced to debts, broken land, and one unfashionable daughter. "We bring what remains." Soft laughter stirred like silk. Lenora stood very still. She had expected disdain. She had not expected the old ache of it, the one that began in her ribs and spread outward, cold and shameful. Her father had died drunk. Her mother had died sewing by candlelight to preserve the appearance of gentility. Their ancestral estate had collapsed wing by wing into ivy and rain. And now she had been brought here as spectacle, the poorest bride among heiresses, the human proof that noble blood could become thin enough to humiliate. "Raise your face," Lord Maris said. She obeyed. The king looked at her then. It was the first true thing that happened all evening. His stillness broke, not in movement, not yet, but in attention. It struck her like weather. His eyes, black at a distance, were in truth a dark and fathomless red, as if some buried ember had been remembered beneath centuries of ash. The hall quieted. Lenora did not understand why the air had suddenly sharpened. Lord Maris smiled wider. "She has no dowry worthy of mention, no strategic borderlands, no allied ships, only a crumbling name. I thought the court might enjoy one final contrast before your Majesty decides among proper brides." The word proper landed like a slap. Something hot touched Lenora's palm. In forcing herself not to tremble, she had driven her fingernails into her own skin. A bead of blood welled at the center of her hand. It fell, 1 drop only. It struck the black marble just below the throne steps. The sound it made was impossibly small, and yet every candle in the hall guttered at once. A murmur rippled outward. Red light flashed beneath the floor, racing through veins hidden inside the stone. The stained glass windows moaned in their lead frames. Someone cried out. Lenora stared at the blood beneath her feet as it spread, not like a stain, but like ink finding an old inscription. Symbols awakened in crimson fire around the king's dais, circles, chains, Ancient sigils no mortal girl should have recognized, yet some sorrowful part of her seemed to know them already. Severin rose. The entire court dropped to one knee. Lenora remained standing only because shock held her upright. The king descended the 7 black steps in complete silence. No guard moved to stop him. No priest spoke. His gaze never left her face. Lord Maris's confidence faltered. "Your Majesty," he began, "surely this is some trick of old stone." "Silence," Severin said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. He stopped before Lenora. Up close, he was more terrible for his beauty because there was no softness in it. His features had the severe perfection of a saint carved for a cathedral that worshipped the night. He smelled faintly of winter cedar and something older, darker, like sealed crypts after rain. Lenora lowered her eyes. "I meant no offense, sire." The king did not answer at once. Then, slowly, he removed one glove. A murmur of alarm moved through the lords. Barehanded, he reached for her. Lenora did not retreat. She wanted to. Her pulse battered her throat. But all her life she had endured what could not be avoided, and endurance had become a kind of dignity. His fingers closed around her wounded hand. The hall inhaled. His touch was cold enough to burn. The blood in her palm brightened. The symbols beneath the floor flared. And before the assembled court, before rival brides, ancient nobles, and those who had brought her here to be laughed at, King Severin, Dashan bent his head and pressed the center of her bleeding hand against the mark at his own throat. Light exploded between them. It burned scarlet, then black, then a strange silver red like moonlight seen through blood. Lenora gasped. Something entered her, not pain exactly, but recognition. A bond. A door flung open in darkness. She felt hunger that was not hers, centuries of restraint, law hammered into the bones of a lonely throne. And beneath it all, buried under layers of force and silence, a grief so vast it made her knees weaken. When the light vanished, a royal sigil shimmered faintly beneath the skin of her wrist. Marked. Publicly, irrevocably, a bride no longer mocked but claimed. The court erupted. Some voices cried treason, others whispered miracle. Several looked at Lord Maris as though he had delivered a weapon into the king's hands without knowing it. Severin released her hand at last. His face had gone even paler, if such a thing was possible. He looked not triumphant, but stricken. "By Coven law," he said, each word falling like iron into water, "Lenora Vale stands under my protection." Lord Maris stumbled back. "Your Majesty, she cannot. There was no petition, no negotiation, no witness prepared." "There were witnesses enough," said the king. Lenora could not seem to breathe. The mark on her wrist throbbed like a second pulse. All around her, nobles stared with a blend of envy, fear, and sudden calculation. She had been brought here to be humiliated. Now the vampire king had placed his protection on her before the whole court. And when Lenora finally dared meet his eyes, she saw something far more dangerous than desire. He looked at her as though he had just remembered a promise he had once tried to bury. They did not send Lenora back with the other brides. She was escorted through the palace by silent attendants in garnet velvet, while the court boiled behind her in scandal. No one explained anything. No one dared touch the wrist that bore the king's mark. Even the women assigned to dress her in a chamber, overlooking the dead royal gardens, moved with uneasy reverence, as if she had become a relic that might curse them for mishandling it. By midnight, the story had already spread through every corridor. The poorest bride, the ruined daughter, the girl meant for ridicule, marked by the king before the full coven. Lenora sat alone beside an unlit hearth, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The chamber was beautiful in the austere way of old palaces. Black paneling veined with silver, high arched windows blurred with rain, a canopy bed draped in wine-dark velvet. And portraits turned face inward against the walls, as though the dead had once grown tired of watching. Somewhere below, the palace bells sounded the second hour after midnight. The mark on her wrist had not faded. It lay just beneath the skin, a delicate branching sigil like frost etched in rubies. It did not hurt. That frightened her more than pain would have. It felt natural, intimate, wrong. A knock came at the door. Lenora rose too quickly. An elderly woman entered, severe and straight-backed in black silk. Her hair was white, braided close to the scalp. Her eyes were pale and sharp. "I am Lady Vera," she said. "Keeper of the Queen's wing." "There is no queen," Lenora answered before she could stop herself. "Not for a very long time," Vera said. "Yet the rooms remain." That was answer enough. Lenora lowered her gaze. "Am I a prisoner?" Lady Vera studied her for a long moment. "That depends on whether you imagine the court outside kinder than the king within it." Lenora had no reply to that. Vera crossed the chamber and laid a folded garment on the bed. A gown of deep charcoal velvet, simple but exquisite, with long sleeves and a high throat. "His Majesty ordered that you be treated according to your new station." "My new station has not been explained to me." "No," Vera said. "It has not." Something in Lenora's restraint finally strained. "Why did he mark me?" Vera's face did not change. "If the king has not spoken, I will not presume." "That is not an answer. It is the only one available to you tonight." The old woman turned to leave, then paused. "Do not show the mark to anyone who asks. Do not wander after dusk without escort. And if Lord Maris requests audience, refuse it. He despises me. Then tonight he despises you with reason." When Vera had gone, Lenora looked again at the rain-dark window. Her reflection hovered over the glass like a ghost. The girl staring back seemed no different from the one who had entered the hall earlier. Same plain features, same dark hair braided without ornament, same careful mouth trained not to reveal too much. Yet beneath her sleeve burned proof that the old life had already torn. She did not sleep. Toward dawn, she heard a sound in the corridor, not footsteps exactly, but the absence of them, the way a room changes when someone powerful enters it. Her breath caught. The door did not open. Still, she knew he was there. The mark warmed suddenly, then cooled. At last the presence receded. Lenora went to the door and laid trembling fingers against the wood. Nothing. Silence only. Yet the space beyond still felt altered, as if something vast had stood there in conflict with itself and turned away. By afternoon, she was summoned. 2 attendants led her through galleries of black stone into a circular chamber lined with tall iron candelabra. At its center stood a long table carved with coven seals. Around it sat 6 vampire lords and ladies in formal black. Their faces were elegant and remote, their beauty sharpened by disapproval. At the head of the chamber stood the king. Severin did not look at her when she entered. His attention remained on the council, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Lady Vera guided Lenora to a place near the wall. "Stand. Speak only if addressed." One of the seated lords, lean-faced and silver-eyed, turned toward the king. "Your Majesty," he said, "we request clarification before rumor becomes precedent." Another, a woman with a lattice of garnets over her throat, said, "A public mark binds protection, yes. But not selection, not marriage, not succession." "Correct," Severin said. Relief moved faintly through the chamber, though Lenora felt none of it. The silver-eyed lord went on. "Then why her?" The king's expression did not alter. "Because the mark answered." "That is impossible," said the woman in garnets. "Nonetheless," Severin said, "it occurred." A silence followed, charged and cold. Lenora kept her eyes lowered, but she felt the scrutiny settle over her like frost. Not lust, not admiration. Evaluation, threat assessment. She was no longer amusing, she had become inconvenient. At last, Severin turned toward her. The full force of his gaze made it difficult to breathe. "Lady Lenora Vale," he said. No one had ever called her lady without irony. She lifted her head. "You will remain in the Queen's wing until the council determines the legal consequence of the mark." Her voice came quiet but steady. "And what consequence do you expect, sire?" The question stirred the room. Lady Vera made a minute movement of alarm. Severin did not rebuke her. His gaze sharpened, as if he were listening to something under her words. "At present," he said, "I expect danger." The silver-eyed lord smiled thinly. "Then perhaps she should be sent away before factions gather around her." "No," the words struck harder than any raised voice. "Coven law is plain," Severin continued. Any soul marked beneath the public seal falls under the throne's personal guard until judgment is rendered. To harm her, threaten her, or remove her without my consent is treason. Lenora saw then what frightened the council. He was not defending a girl. He was invoking law in its oldest form. The woman in garnets leaned back. This court has not seen a royal mark awaken in a mortal for 180 years. Then consider tonight educational, Severin said. The meeting ended badly. No one said so aloud, but the room fractured beneath politeness. The council rose. Robes swept the floor. Pale hands tightened on chair backs and folded fan ribs. Lenora remained still until Lady Vera signaled that she might leave. As she turned, the mark on her wrist flared with sudden heat. A whisper brushed her ear, not from the room. Not from any mouth she could see. Run. She stopped so abruptly that Vera looked back. Then the chamber doors flew inward. A boy young, no more than 17, dressed in servant gray, staggered through clutching a blood-soaked side. He collapsed against the threshold, gasping. A black-feathered bolt protruded from his ribs. Hunters, he choked. Inside the lower crypt passage, he never finished. The bolt detonated in pale fire. And all the candles in the council chamber went out. Darkness took the room in a single breath. Not the soft dimness of a chamber at dusk, but total black, violent, swallowing complete. Lenora heard the crash of overturned iron, the hiss of extinguished wax, the abrupt movement of bodies no longer pretending at civility. Somewhere near the door, the dying servant gave one awful cry and fell silent. Then a hand closed around Lenora's upper arm. She almost cried out. "Do not speak," said the king. Even in darkness, his voice had direction, authority. It cut through panic like a blade through cloth. He drew her behind him just as something whistled through the air. Metal struck stone where she had stood. A second later, the chamber exploded with motion. Vampires moved like shadows given teeth. The council, elegant a moment before, became monstrous in survival, swift, cold, lethal. Lenora heard snarls kept usually behind courtly mouths. She heard the wet sound of impact and the cracking report of some hidden weapon discharging blessed powder. Severin's arm barred her back against the wall. "Close your eyes," he said. Obedience came more quickly than thought. There was a flare of heat through her lids, then a sound like a storm trapped inside a cathedral. The air rushed outward. Stone groaned. When Lenora opened her eyes again, scarlet fire clung to the far end of the chamber. A masked man in hunter's leathers had been thrown against a pillar so hard the marble split around him. 3 more were already dead. The silver-eyed lord stood over one with blood at the corner of his mouth. No one looked human any longer. Lenora pressed a hand to her own lips. Severin remained unnaturally still amid the violence, his face unchanged, only his eyes brighter than before. He had not drawn a weapon. He did not need one. "Your Majesty," Lady Vera said sharply, "this was aimed at the girl." "I know. You cannot keep her here." His reply came without turning. "I can keep her alive." A surviving hunter sprang from the gallery above with a blade burning white. Severin moved. Lenora barely saw it happen. One moment the man was descending, the next he hung in the air by the throat, caught in the king's bare hand. The blade fell, hissing against stone. The hunter clawed at Severin's wrist, choking. "Who sent you?" the king asked. The man spat blood and a prayer. Severin's expression cooled into something older than cruelty. "Wrong answer." There was a crack like frozen wood breaking. The body dropped. Lenora turned away too late. Her stomach lurched. She had known what vampires were. She had told herself she knew. Yet knowledge in daylight stories was one thing. The sight of sovereign violence at arm's length was another. When she swayed, Severin's attention snapped back to her at once. He came toward her more slowly than he had moved toward the hunter, as though remembering she was mortal and might startle like a wounded bird. The contrast of it unsettled her more than the killing had. "Look at me," he said. She forced herself to. "You are unharmed." It was not a question. "Yes," she whispered. His gaze dropped briefly to the mark on her wrist, then rose again, troubled by something he did not say. "You will come with me." No one challenged him. The palace had shifted. Whatever uncertainty followed her public marking, the attack had sharpened it into threat. Lenora understood now that if hunters had risked the inner crypt passage to reach the council chamber, then someone within the palace had opened a way. Someone believed her death worth that cost. Severin took her not to the queen's wing but downward, through a spiral stair hidden behind a carved screen. Only Lady Vera followed, carrying a single lantern. The king walked ahead in silence, one gloved hand resting lightly against the wall, as if he needed no light at all to navigate the ancient descent. At last they reached a narrow passage lined with sealed doors of black iron. "The sanctuary vaults," Vera said quietly. "No one enters without the throne's leave." "No one," Severin repeated. He opened the last door himself. The room beyond was unexpectedly small. There was a stone bed dressed in white linen, a desk, a hearth, and shelves containing old books and sealed caskets. No windows, no mirrors, only safety. Lenora stepped inside. Severin remained at the threshold. "You will stay here until dawn." The command was calm, but fatigue had entered it, not weakness, burden. She surprised herself by saying, "Are you injured?" Lady Vera looked sharply at her. Perhaps mortal brides did not ask kings such questions, but Severin answered. "No," she nodded, though she was not certain she believed him. His cuff was torn. There was a dark stain at one wrist that might have been blood, not necessarily his. "Why would hunters come for me?" she asked. He watched her for a long moment. "Because someone has remembered what the mark means." "And what does it mean?" A pause. "It means," he said at last, "that you should have been impossible." He turned as if to go. The fear in her, stretched taut since the council chamber, overcame caution. "Did you know me before tonight?" That stopped him. Lady Vera lowered the lantern. The silence that followed felt very old. "No," Severin said. Yet there was strain in the word, enough for Lenora to hear the incompleteness of it. He looked at her as one might look at a locked chapel after hearing music inside. "Not as I should have," he added. Then he left. Vera set the lantern down beside the bed. "Sleep if you can." "I cannot." "No," the old woman said. "I thought not." When she too had gone, Lenora sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the stone settle around her. The mark pulsed once, twice, then quieted. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind would not still. She thought of Lord Maris's smile collapsing into fear. She thought of the hunters choosing her over the council itself. She thought of the king saying she should have been impossible. At length, she rose and crossed to the shelves. Most of the books were written in languages she could not read. One, however, had no title on its spine. When she opened it, pressed between two pages lay a single portrait sketch in charcoal, a young woman in plain dark dress, not Lenora. And yet so like her in the eyes, the mouth, the quiet carriage of grief, that Lenora's breath caught. At the bottom, in faded ink, was written only, "For the bride we were forbidden to remember." Morning in the sanctuary vault did not arrive with sunlight. It announced itself instead through lessening cold, through the silence of the palace changing shape above the stone, through the way the lantern flame no longer seemed to struggle against the dark. Lenora had not slept. She had spent the remaining hours of the night with the charcoal sketch in her lap, tracing the old paper's edges and feeling, with each passing minute, that the world she had known was not merely shifting, but being uncovered. Forbidden to remember. A bride. Who? And why had the woman's face resembled her so painfully? Lady Vera returned at dawn with tea and a basin of hot water. Her expression remained composed, but she noticed the portrait at once. "You should not have found that. It was not hidden very well. It was hidden from the right eyes." Lenora held the paper carefully. "Who is she?" Vera set down the tray. "A ghost court prefers not to name. That is not enough." "No," said Vera, and for the first time there was something like pity in her face. "It is merely all I can give without disobedience." Lenora folded the sketch and placed it beside the untouched tea. "Everyone here speaks in half-truths. Full truths are rarely survivable in old palaces." Before Lenora could answer, the iron door opened. Severin entered alone. He was dressed more plainly than the night before, in black tailored to severity, with no ceremonial silver and no jeweled clasp. Yet simplicity on him only made power appear cleaner. His face betrayed nothing of the council attack except a white line of healing skin at the base of his throat, just above the collar. Lenora's eyes went there before she could stop them. The king noticed. "It is of no consequence. Then hunters can wound you. All creatures can be wounded." Lady Vera withdrew without a word, leaving them in a silence that felt suddenly intimate for having no witness. Severin's gaze fell to the portrait on the table. Something unreadable crossed his features. "You found that?" "Yes." He did not ask what she thought of it. Instead, he stepped toward the desk, opened a carved box, and withdrew a small silver knife. Lenora went still. He saw it. "If I intended harm, I would not require a knife." The remark was so dry, so unexpectedly human beneath all his coldness, that it unsettled her more than reassurance would have done. "What is it for?" she asked. "The mark reacted to your blood in public," he said. "I need to know whether it will answer in private." Lenora looked at the blade. Must it? Yes. There were moments, she had learned, when fear could not be argued with. This was one. She sat in the straight-backed chair near the hearth and held out her hand. She did not trust her voice. Severin approached slowly. He did not take her wrist at once. His restraint was meticulous, almost painful to watch. When at last his fingers touched her skin, the mark beneath it brightened. His own face altered, not with desire, but with concentration sharpened by something deeper. "One cut," he said quietly. She nodded. The knife bit her thumb, a sharp sting, nothing more, a dark bead welled. Before it fell, the air in the room changed. Lenora felt it first in her chest, a sudden downward pull like a chapel bell sounding underwater. The shelves rattled. The silver knife slipped from Severin's hand and struck stone. Blood from her thumb ran not down but outward across her skin, threading into the mark with luminous red. Severin caught her wrist. The world opened. She did not faint. Fainting would have been mercy. Instead, she remained terribly conscious as vision crashed through her like floodwater. A ballroom lit by candelabras. Snow against leaded glass. A younger Severin, not young in truth but less burdened, standing before a mortal woman in black velvet. Her face, so like the portrait, so like Lenora's own, tilted upward with frightened dignity. Around them, voices rose in argument. A council chamber. The phrase coven law repeated with contempt. Then another image, hands male, jeweled, cruel, lifting a chain hung with a crystal vial. A glamour, words in a dead tongue. "Forget, hide, sever, let no king remember the promised line." Lenora cried out. The vision changed, fire in a chapel crypt. The same mortal woman bleeding against an altar. Severin reaching her too late, grief with fangs. Rage so controlled it became silence. A vow spoken over a body already cooling. Then darkness. Not absence. Suppression. Layer after layer of it wound around names, faces, lineage, memory, until only law remained somewhere deep beneath, waiting for blood to wake it. Lenora tore her wrist free with a gasp. The room snapped back into place. She was half out of the chair, breathless, her hand clutched to her chest. Severin had stepped back, as if her pain had struck him physically. The mark on both their skins, hers visible, his hidden under collar and restraint, seemed to echo one another for a moment before fading. "You saw," he said. It was not a question. Lenora stared at him, horror and sorrow crowding together. "There was a woman." "Yes, she was promised to you." His jaw tightened once. "Yes, they made you forget." Silence answered. She understood then, with a strange ache, why his first look upon her in the hall had seemed like recognition dragged from a grave. It had not been her face alone. It had been bloodline, law, memory forcing itself past an old mutilation. "Was she my mother?" Lenora asked. For the first time since she had met him, Severin looked almost unguarded. "No," he said. "She was your grandmother," Lenora's breath caught. "Her name was Eline Vale. She was to become my queen under treaty and vow. Before the bond could be completed, members of my own council placed a suppression glamour upon the court and upon me. They hid her line. They erased what they could. They told the kingdom she died of fever, and she did not. No," his voice dropped lower. She died because I failed to reach her in time. The room seemed suddenly too small to contain the sorrow in it. Lenora pressed her bleeding thumb into her palm. Then they have known about my family all along. Some of them, Severin said. Not all, and they humiliated me before the court because a forgotten bloodline is easiest to control when it learns to despise itself. The cruelty of that truth struck with more force than the knife had. Lenora lowered her eyes, and when she spoke, her voice trembled despite her efforts. Why protect me now? Severin looked at her as though the answer were both simple and unbearable. Because they failed to erase you, he said. Then a bell began tolling above them, 3 slow iron notes, ceremonial and grave. Severin's expression hardened at once. The council is assembling, he said. And now they know the glamour has broken. The hours before the council convened passed in a tension so fine it seemed to wire the palace from foundation to turret. Lenora was returned to the queen's wing under double guard. No one called her by name in the corridors. They bowed instead, too deeply to be sincere and too carefully to be accidental. Fear had entered the palace, and fear made etiquette precise. From her window she could see the dead gardens spread below in black geometry. Frost-white hedges, moon-bleached statues, a dry fountain veined with old leaves. Ravens gathered on the stone rims as though summoned for witness. Beyond the gardens, the city climbed the hill in slate roofs and winter smoke. Somewhere in those lower streets, ordinary lives continued, bread ovens lit, shutters opened, children sent running with baskets, while within the palace, ancient predators debated whether a poor girl should live, wed, or disappear. Lady Vera fastened Lenora into a gown the color of storm clouds. It is beautiful, Lenora said quietly, surprised. It belonged to no one, Vera replied. I thought that fitting. Lenora looked at her reflection only briefly. The dress did not make her noble. It made her look like herself if herself had been granted dignity. Her dark hair was braided simply. Her throat remained bare. Will they try to kill me in the council chamber? She asked. Vera did not smile. Not directly. That honesty was, in its way, a kindness. As they walked, Lenora said, You knew about my grandmother. I suspected. You served the court then. I served the queen's household before there was one, Vera said. Then I served memory, since memory was all that remained. Lenora absorbed that in silence. At the chamber doors, Severin waited. He did not speak until Vera withdrew beyond earshot. Then he offered Lenora his arm. The gesture shocked her more than any command. She hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her gloved fingers lightly upon his sleeve. Even through layers of cloth, the contact rang through her. Not pleasure, not yet, something deeper and stranger, as if the body recognized proximity to danger and also, treacherously, to shelter. The doors opened. The council chamber had transformed since the attack. The cracked pillar was gone, replaced by black drapery. Priests in crimson collars stood at the walls. Silver braziers burned with pale fire that smelled of myrrh and iron. Around the long carved table gathered not 6 but 12 council members, elders summoned from hidden estates, ancient faces smooth as marble and 10 times as merciless. Lord Maris was among them. He went visibly pale when Lenora entered on the king's arm. Severin guided her not to the wall, but to a chair set one place below the throne's end of the table, a place of acknowledgement. Whispers moved like insects through dry leaves. The proceedings began formally. Charges were not spoken as charges, because aristocracies preferred prettier language for cruelty. Instead, there were motions, observations, concerns regarding legal instability and mortal vulnerability. 3 different elders suggested that Lenora be moved to a convent under protective obscurity. One proposed that the public mark be declared a ceremonial error caused by blood contamination in the floor sigils. At that, Severin finally spoke. You would nullify an old seal because it inconveniences you. An elder with amber eyes folded his hands. I would preserve order. You mean precedent. I mean the difference between throne and chaos. Severin's gaze cooled. The throne does not fear its own law. The amber-eyed elder turned toward Lenora. Then let the girl answer. Lady Lenora, if that title may presently be used, did your family ever inform you of a covenant with the crown? Lenora kept her hands still in her lap. No, did your mother speak of Queen Elaine Vale? My mother never named her as queen. But she named her, a pause. Yes, the room sharpened. She said only that my grandmother died young, Lenora continued, and that there were things our family survived by forgetting. Lord Maris laughed once, brittle with nerves. Peasant superstition dressed as testimony. Severin's head turned, the entire chamber chilled. Say peasant again, the king said softly, and I will remind you how brief titles are. Lord Maris swallowed his next words. The amber-eyed elder leaned back. Even so, a forgotten agreement from 2 generations past cannot govern the present unless corroborated by a surviving witness. There is one, said Lady Vera from the wall. All eyes turned. The old keeper stepped forward holding a sealed black casket. No, Severin said sharply, but Vera met his gaze without flinching. Your Majesty, concealment has already cost too much. She opened the casket. Inside lay a ledger bound in cracked burgundy leather, pages yellowed with age, wax seals intact. The original household register of the intended bridal covenant, Vera said, recorded before the suppression glamour was cast. Hidden among abandoned inventories in the Queen's wing. A priest took the ledger to the table. The chamber fell into breathless stillness as he read. Names, dates, witnesses, King Severin Dashan. Elaine Vale, a covenant not of convenience only, but reparative alliance after a civil war. 1 generation of distance. 1 future bride promised from the Vale line when the throne called again. The room darkened with comprehension. Lenora understood then, her family had not fallen into ruin by accident alone. They had been pushed there, erased from favor, rendered harmless. Forgotten on purpose, Lord Maris rose halfway from his chair. This proves nothing about the girl herself. She may carry the blood, but that hardly makes her suitable. She was not raised for the court. She has no discipline in vampire custom, no protection against influence, no. Enough, Severin said, but Maris, desperate now, reached for his last weapon. Would you place the throne beside a seamstress's daughter because your father's court misplaced a treaty? The insult struck harder because it was partly true. Lenora had sewn to keep her mother warm. She had mended hems by candlelight while noble girls learned music and statecraft. She lowered her eyes before shame could show. Then Severin spoke into the silence. I would place the throne beside the woman my court tried to bury alive in history. No one moved, not even Lord Maris. Lenora looked up. The king's face remained composed, yet something in his voice had changed. Not affection, not softness, but a terrible and unmistakable refusal to let her be diminished again. The amber-eyed elder said carefully, if the council acknowledges the covenant, the law is plain. The marked descendant must either be elevated to formal consort under royal guard or condemned as a destabilizing claimant and surrendered to trial. Lenora felt the room tilt. Trial, not discussion. Not delay, trial. The elder folded the ledger shut. We will convene at moonrise. And as the council rose, Lord Maris met Lenora's gaze with naked hatred. She knew then with cold certainty that the danger to her did not begin at moonrise. It had just been given permission. Moonrise painted the palace silver and black. Until then, Lenora was confined not by locked doors, but by instructions spoken too gently to disobey. Guards remained outside the Queen's wing. Lady Vera paced like a thin black shadow between hearth and threshold. No one said the word assassins, though it lived in every silence. At last, unable to bear waiting, Lenora asked the question that had been turning within her all afternoon. Why did they fear my grandmother so much? Vera stopped before the dying fire. Because she was loved, Lenora frowned. By the king. By the city first, Vera said, and eventually by him, though neither of them named it soon enough. Elaine Vale was mortal, yes, but she understood hunger. Mortal hunger, winter hunger, the kind that visits poor households and teaches mercy. She intended to open the palace granaries, after the Eastern famine. Several elder houses profited from scarcity. A queen-like that would have broken old arrangements. Lenora thought of her mother stitching until her eyesight failed, thought of debts called in merciless seasons. So they hid her line. They hid what might return through it. A hard knock interrupted them, not frantic, formal. One of the outer guards spoke through the door. His Majesty requests Lady Lenora in the lower chapel. Vera went still. At this hour, the order came under seal. Lenora rose at once, but Vera seized her wrist, not the marked one. Wait, the old woman crossed to the door without opening it. Who bears the seal? A pause. Lord Maris. Vera's face sharpened into fury. Stand away from this threshold. Too late. The lock burst inward with a crack of splintering wood. Two guards were thrown against opposite walls, blood already blackening at their collars. Masked men rushed the chamber. Hunters. No, their movements were wrong. Hired blades, fast but human, armed with silvered hooks and chain nets. Lenora backed toward the hearth. Vera drew a thin knife from her sleeve and slit one attacker from wrist to elbow before another struck her across the temple. She fell hard against the chair. A net flew. Lenora tried to duck, but silvered weights caught her shoulders and dragged her down. The mesh burned through cloth like fire. She bit back a cry. Alive, one man hissed. The Lord said alive. A sound cut through the room. Not loud, not near, yet every attacker froze. The candles bent toward the doorway as though pulled by wind. Severin entered. He wore no ceremonial black now, no gloves, no courtly mask of stillness. Darkness seemed to move with him, clothed in his shape. His eyes burned red in the ruined chamber. No one commanded. No one pleaded. The first man died before finishing his next breath. The second tried to drag Lenora up as shield. Severin was upon him instantly, tearing him away with such controlled force that only the blood on the walls testified to what had happened. The third stumbled backward toward the broken door, dropped his weapon, and begged. The king did not kill him at once. Who sent you? Severin asked. The man shook so violently that his teeth struck together. Maris, through the lower steward, he said the girl had to vanish before trial. Severin looked almost bored. I know. Then he snapped the man's neck and let the body fall. Silence returned in fragments. Lenora struggled beneath the burning net. Severin was beside her immediately, one hand hovering over the silver mesh without touching it. For the first time she saw uncertainty break through his precision. It will hurt, he said. I know. His eyes lifted to hers, as if measuring whether she did. Then he tore the net apart with his bare hands. Pain knifed through Lenora's shoulders and wrists where the silver had touched. She could not stop the cry that escaped her. The world swam. Before she could hit the floor, Severin caught her. He did not hold her like a lover. He held her like something breakable he had already once failed to save. Vera, he said. The old woman, blood at her temple but conscious, pushed herself upright. Lower chapel chest, black vial. Quickly, Severin lifted Lenora as if she weighed nothing and carried her through the palace. The lower chapel lay beneath the east transept, long abandoned except by grief. It was small and roofed in stone ribs, with a cracked altar and iron votives melted into crimson clumps. Severin laid Lenora upon the altar steps, then went to the chest hidden behind it. Pain spread wherever the silver had touched her, not ordinary pain, a bright, invasive burn that seemed intent on entering the bone. Severin returned with a black glass vial. Look at me, he said. She did, she could barely help it. This is blood medicine, he said. Old, sacred, it will bind briefly with the mark and neutralize the silver. Your blood? Yes, Lenora's pulse staggered. He uncorked the vial and paused. You may refuse. She almost laughed at the formality of that in a chapel full of ash and blood. Will refusal kill me? Possibly. Then I do not refuse. His expression changed by less than a breath. He knelt and touched the vial to her lips. The blood was cold and dark and metallic sweet. Only a mouthful, nothing more. Yet when she swallowed, the mark on her wrist blazed. Pain surged, then transformed. Images flashed behind her eyes. Not visions this time, but feelings, clean and immediate. His restraint, his hunger chained so tightly it had become identity, his terror whenever harm came near her. His exhaustion after centuries of silence. Lenora gasped. Severin drew the vial away at once. The chapel seemed suddenly smaller, the air between them charged. A drop of blood remained at the corner of her mouth. His gaze fixed on it, not lustfully, but with such rigid control that she felt the danger of him more acutely than ever before. He looked away first. The gesture was so disciplined, so costly, that something in Lenora's chest softened against her will. "Why do you always turn away?" she whispered. His voice, when it came, was roughened by restraint, because wanting is not the same thing as permission. The answer entered her like light entering a sealed room. Before she could speak again, steps sounded in the chapel above. Many steps. Armed, Severin rose in one fluid motion and faced the stair. "The trial," he said. Then, without looking back, he added, "And this time they have come for both of us." They conducted the trial in the moon court, where the ceiling opened to the night. Lenora had passed beneath its arches once before as a child, when her mother brought her to the city for winter cloth. Then it had seemed merely grand. Now it felt ceremonial in the oldest, cruelest sense, a place built to make judgment resemble destiny. Black columns ringed the oval chamber. Above, the moon shone through a circular aperture in the roof, pouring silver onto the central dais where coven law was enacted. Priests stood in ordered rows. Nobles packed the outer galleries like ravens on cathedral stone. Every face turned as Severin entered with Lenora beside him. Not on his arm this time, at his side. The distinction mattered. The silver burns still ached beneath her sleeves, though the blood medicine had dulled them into a deep and manageable heat. She walked carefully, not from weakness but from awareness. Tonight the court wished to measure her composure, her fear, her usefulness. She would give them as little of herself as she could. Lord Maris stood among the accused, as well as the accusers, though he had clearly not expected that position. The steward who had opened the false seal for him knelt in chains nearby, already pale with despair. Treason had many levels. The court intended to count them all. At the high seat of law sat Elder Cassivar, amber-eyed and immaculate, appointed to voice the verdict the council agreed upon. No one missed that he had once supported forgetting the veil line entirely. The proceedings opened with liturgy, then testimony. Vera spoke first, precise and merciless. She described the broken seal, the hired attackers, the names taken from the dying lower steward. A priest corroborated the blood signatures. Maris denied nothing successfully. The evidence lay too neatly around him. Yet treason against the crown was not the only matter before the court. When his own judgment had been read, Cassivar turned to Lenora. Lady Lenora Vale, descendant of Elaine Vale, publicly marked beneath royal seal. Under coven law, your position must now be declared. Are you claimant, consort, hostage, or hazard? The titles struck one by one like stones cast into a well. Lenora lifted her head. I did not seek the mark. No one claims you did. I did not seek the court. A murmur quickly silenced. Cassivar steepled his fingers. And yet you are here. The law must define what the throne has awakened. Severin's voice entered coldly. The throne is capable of defining its own acts. Not when those acts alter succession, Cassivar said. If this woman stands as acknowledged consort under broken covenant, the palace must accept a mortal at its heart. If she does not, then the mark must be judged aberrant and removed. Lenora felt Severin become still beside her, more still than stillness, removed. She knew at once the word disguised something ugly. How is a mark removed? She asked. No one answered immediately. At last Cassivar said, through ritual severance. And if it fails, the elder's pause told the truth before his mouth did, then the bearer fails with it. A chill went through the galleries. Lenora understood in a single clean stroke what several of them preferred. Dress the killing as procedure. Call it law. Spill no public blood, and history would accept the wording. Beside her, Severin said, no severance will be attempted. You presume outcome, Cassivar replied. I forbid the method. A ripple moved through the court. Cassavar's expression hardened. Even kings are answerable to coven law. Kings are, said Severin. Murderers hiding behind it are not. The chamber tightened around that sentence. Then Maris laughed, a jagged, desperate sound. Speak of murder, your majesty. Shall we speak also of Elaine Vale, of how a mortal bride dies whenever this throne is tempted toward softness? Gasps broke through the ranks. Lenora felt rather than saw Severin's fury. Maris pressed on with the recklessness of a doomed man. You failed the grandmother. You will fail the granddaughter. That is why the old lords acted. Not from greed alone, but from sense. Mortals beside the throne die. They always die. Something in Lenora recoiled, not from the cruelty, but from the possibility of truth inside it. Severin took one step forward. Cassavar rose sharply. No blood on the law floor. For a terrible moment, it seemed the king might ignore him. Instead, Severin stopped. His control returned so absolutely that it frightened Lenora more than violence would have. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that the entire court leaned to hear. You will not speak her name again. Maris's smile faltered. Cassavar seized the opening. Then let the girl speak her own will. If she refuses the throne, the mark may yet be contained without elevation. Every face turned to Lenora. The moonlight fell full upon her. She had endured hunger, ridicule, the long humiliations of diminished blood. She had survived by not demanding, by not presuming herself worthy of rescue. Now the court asked whether she wished to bind herself to a king who had become danger and shelter at once, whose nearness unsettled her breath, whose history with her bloodline was written in concealment and grief. If she refused, perhaps she might live a little longer, hidden somewhere cold and watched. If she accepted, she would step into a darkness vast enough to swallow whatever remained of the old Lenora Vale. Cassavar spoke again. Do you claim the bond? Lenora looked not at the court but at Severin. His face was unreadable, yet there was no command in it, no pressure. Only the terrible discipline of allowing her choice to remain hers, even now. That, more than any plea, undid her. I claim, she said softly, the truth that was taken from my family. The galleries stirred. Cassavar's eyes narrowed. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. Lenora's voice steadied. I do not know what place your law would make of me, but I know I was dragged here to be humiliated for a bloodline your court buried. I know the king marked me before witnesses. I know men tried to kill me for what I carry. If the bond is a danger, then it is a danger your house created long before I was born. Silence fell, not because her words were loud. Because they were true. Cassavar drew breath to reply, and a priest screamed. Everyone turned. The chained steward at the edge of the dais convulsed once, twice, then split open at the throat as though an invisible hand had cut him from within. Blood sprayed across the silver floor seals. The moonlight went red. Hidden sigils ignited beneath the law circle, sigils no priest had drawn for this trial. Cassavar shouted, "Seal the court!" Too late. The entire moon court locked from the inside, with a thunder of descending iron. And from behind the altar screens stepped 3 elder lords no one had summoned, faces ancient, smiling, and crowned in old forbidden gold. One of them looked straight at Lenora. She claims the truth, he said, then let her die with it. Panic did not begin as screaming, it began as certainty. The 3 elder lords advancing from behind the altar screens carried that certainty with them, the certainty of long-hidden power, of schemes nested beneath schemes, of histories edited with the patience only immortals possessed. Their gold circlets marked them as members of the old regency, a faction supposedly dissolved after the Civil War. Yet here they stood, smiling with the peace of men who had finally stepped from behind their own masks. The tallest among them, Lord Cirid, spread his hands over the blood-lit seals. No one leaves, he said, not until the line of Elaine Vale ends. The moon court erupted. Priests rushed the barriers. Nobles scattered from the galleries in shrill disorder. Younger vampires sprang toward the dais with bared fangs, and courtly manners forgot. The iron doors did not yield. The red sigils beneath the floor surged brighter, feeding on the steward's spilled blood. Severin moved Lenora behind him in one swift motion. "Stay at my back," she did, not because she was meek. Because there are moments when survival lies in knowing where one belongs amid violence. Lord Sirid laughed softly. "There, at last, some honesty from you, Severin. All these years wearing dignity over hunger like velvet over armor. Did you think we would fail to see what the girl is becoming to you?" Severin said nothing. Lenora felt the tension in him tighten, not only fury, but choice. The elder lord's smile sharpened. "We spared you once by burying the mortal weakness. We will spare the throne again." Then everything happened at once. A blast of pale fire struck the central seal. Priests were thrown aside. Cassivar drew a ceremonial blade and drove it through one of the hidden runes. Lady Vera, impossibly quick for her years, seized Lenora's arm and dragged her toward a side arcade, just as a gout of blood-red flame ripped through the place where she had stood. "Move," Vera snapped. Lenora stumbled after her through falling ash and shattered silver lamps. Behind them came the sounds of battle, stones splitting, steel ringing, voices giving orders in old war tongues. She heard Severin at least once, not shouting but speaking some command so ancient the room itself seemed to obey it. Vera shoved Lenora behind a column. "Listen to me. The old regents cannot break the public mark while he lives. So they will separate you first. They said no one leaves. There are ways not listed in law." As if to prove it, Sirid appeared across the court, his gaze locking on Lenora with predatory delight. He was older looking than the others, his beauty thinned into something bird-like and cruel. "There you are," he said. Vera threw her knife. Sirid caught it in midair without glancing down. Then he smiled and lifted one hand. The column behind Lenora cracked. Stone exploded. She was flung sideways into the ruined edge of the law dais, pain blooming through her ribs. Before she could rise, Sirid crossed the distance impossibly fast and seized the marked wrist. Agony tore through her. Not from touch alone, but from what he tried to do with it. Force, intrusion, severance beginning at the soul instead of the flesh. Lenora cried out. The mark burned white-hot, then black. "Look," Sirid murmured, almost kindly, "how fragile mortal devotion is." He pressed his thumb over the sigil. The world narrowed to pain. Then Sirid's hand was gone. Severin had him by the throat. No one had seen the king arrive. One instant Lenora was dying under an elder's grip. The next Sirid was lifted bodily from the floor, his elegant shoes kicking above the blood-red seals. Severin's face had changed. The restraint was still there, but it had become terrible, a king's control at the edge of annihilation. His eyes burned like opened graves. "You touched what is mine to protect," he said. Sirid smiled through crushed breath. "At last, there it is." He drove a hidden blade upward into Severin's side. Lenora gasped. The blade sank deep. Black blood darkened the king's coat. Yet Severin did not release him. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward Lenora, as if checking, absurdly, impossibly, that she had not been struck again. That glance broke something in her, not decorum, not fear. Distance. She rose, shaking, and crossed the last step between them. The mark on her wrist blazed in answer to the blood running down his side. "Severin," she whispered. He looked at her then. Around them the court raged. Stone burned. Elders died. Priests shouted. Yet within that narrow space of ruin, the silence between them deepened into recognition. He had never asked anything of her but truth. He had never used power to force affection where only law could compel obedience. He had turned away whenever desire might become theft. And now he stood bleeding because he had chosen her life over his throne's safety. Lenora lifted one trembling hand to his face. He went utterly still. Her fingertips touched his cheek, cold, smooth, real. The contact sent a shudder through the mark, through the room, through whatever old vow lived beneath both their skins. Severin's eyes closed for one fractured second, as if that small mercy cost more than battle wounds. When he opened them again, there was warning in them, and hunger. And reverence bound hard inside restraint. "You should step back," he said, voice rough. "I know." But she did not. Neither did he. The first kiss came like a vow broken open, not hungry at first. Not wild, only inevitable. Severin bent with infinite care, as though even now he meant to give her time to refuse, and when his mouth touched hers, the world seemed to still around the point of contact. Cold and darkness and old grief met the quiet endurance she had carried all her life, and neither remained unchanged. It was not innocence lost, it was loneliness recognized. Then the bond answered. Red-silver light burst from the mark on her wrist and raced through the shattered law circle. The false sigils the old regents had planted cracked apart like thin ice. The iron doors groaned. Above them, the moonlight returned from red to silver. Sirid gave a choked cry. Severin released Lenora only to kill him. This time the violence was swift enough to seem merciful. When Sirid's body struck the floor, the remaining two regents recoiled as if from holy fire. One fled toward the sealed arcade. The other was brought down by Cassivar's blade through the spine. The court began to unlock, but Severin swayed. Lenora caught at him instinctively, and her hand came away black with his blood. His knees almost gave. And for the first time since she had known him, true fear entered his eyes, not for himself, but because the blade in his side still burned with the light of hunter-forged silver. They took Severin to the old royal crypt because no other chamber was warded strongly enough to contain both his wound and the court's fear. The silver blade had broken off inside him. Priests would not touch it until the regents' bodies were counted and the moon court purified. Cassivar muttered of procedures. Vera cursed him like a dockhand from centuries earlier. Lenora ignored them all and walked beside the stretcher until they reached the crypt vault beneath the chapel, where dead kings lay in marble sleep, and no law but necessity remained. The chamber smelled of wax, cold stone, and old incense. Severin dismissed everyone with one look. Even wounded, he was obeyed. When the last priest withdrew, Lenora found herself alone with him among the tombs. He had seated himself against the base of a carved sarcophagus rather than lie down. Pride, perhaps, or instinct. The broken silver still protruded from beneath his ribs, bright against the black stain of blood. His face had gone nearly colorless, yet his gaze remained conscious and fixed on her, not on the pain. "You should not be here," he said. "I know. You may have noticed," he said with a shadow of dry bitterness, "that I am not presently at my safest." Lenora crossed the chamber and knelt before him. "I noticed." She did not pretend not to understand. A wounded vampire king, blood in the air, hunger sharpened by injury, and still, even now, he warned her away before he asked help. The realization hurt her with tenderness. "What must be done?" she asked. The blade removed. His breathing remained steady by force. Then the wound sealed with blood. Priest's blood, his eyes held hers. No, silence spread. The answer was there between them, living and dangerous. Lenora looked at the mark on her wrist. At the black blood on his shirt. At the hand he kept clenched against the stone, so controlled that the knuckles had gone pale. "You said blood exchange is sacred. It is. And if I choose it," his jaw tightened, "do not choose from pity. I am not." He shut his eyes once briefly as if that were worse. Lenora had spent her life being made small by the anxieties of other people. Too poor, too quiet, too easily overlooked. But choice, when it finally came to her, arrived with startling clarity. She did not want the court's version of safety. She did not want concealment bought with her own erasure. And whatever lay between her and this ancient, wounded king had grown beyond accident. Not yet peace, not yet simple happiness, but truth. "Tell me what to do," she said. Severin opened his eyes again. The hunger in them was no longer hidden, yet neither was the discipline holding it at bay. "Break the blade first. It is blessed silver. If you pull it whole, it will burn deeper." She nodded. He guided her hand to the hilt. Even through cloth she felt the lethal cold of it. "On my count." Lenora steadied herself. "All right. 1, his hand closed over hers. 2, the crypt seemed to listen. "Now." They broke the blade together. Severin's body arched once, violently, but no sound escaped him. Lenora nearly wept at the effort of his silence. She pulled the shattered length free. Black blood spilled over her fingers, hot this time from injury. "The blood," he said, voice frayed now. "Your wrist." Lenora hesitated only a moment. Then she took the sharp broken silver, turned her marked wrist upward, and cut. Pain flashed bright. Before fear could catch up, Severin took her arm. His gaze lifted to hers one final time, asking again what he had asked in every other way since she met him. Permission. Lenora nodded. He bent. The first touch of his mouth to her wrist was almost reverent. Then the wound opened beneath his lips, and the bond answered with such force that she gasped. It was not violation, not theft. It was passage, her blood moving into an old emptiness, his hunger receiving not conquest but consecration. The crypt darkened at the edges. Names carved into stone seemed to hum. Lenora felt his pain entering her only as echo, enough to understand its depth, but not enough to crush. Beneath it she felt everything else he could not say aloud. Loneliness, discipline, memory, the precise moment in the hall when he had seen her, and the suppression glamour shattered forever. When he released her, the wound at his side was already closing. The cut at her wrist had sealed into a brighter version of the same mark. Neither spoke for several breaths. Then Severin touched her hand, not as king, not as claimant, but with a care so naked it might have been sorrow. I should not have let this happen, he said. Lenora looked at him through the dim crypt light. You did not let it happen. You fought it at every step. A bitter softness touched his mouth. You noticed. You always turned away. Yes. Why? His thumb moved once across her knuckles. Because once a man has watched a woman die for being near his throne, he learns to mistrust every tenderness in himself. Lenora felt her throat tighten. I am not my grandmother. No, his gaze deepened. And that is the only reason I am still sane. She almost smiled then, through all of it. Above them, bells began ringing through the palace. Not alarm, ceremony. Severin went very still. The court has chosen, he said. How do you know? They ring only that way for death or acknowledgement. He rose, steadier now, though pale. Lenora stood with him. For one suspended moment, they faced each other among the dead kings, bound by blood and choice, and the kind of intimacy that did not need witness to become irrevocable. Then the crypt doors opened. Lady Vera stood there, breathless, eyes bright with something like disbelief. The council has fallen into factions, she said. Cassivar has invoked emergency succession law. If you mean to keep her alive, Your Majesty, you must claim her before dawn. Severin looked at Lenora. And Lenora understood that before dawn, she would either become the acknowledged darkness at his side, or the kingdom would try once more to bury her. Before dawn, the palace gathered in the Black Basilica. It had once been a cathedral, before conquest altered its saints. The high nave still soared in pointed arches, but the windows held no martyrs now, only kings, moons, and ancestral beasts wrought in obsidian glass. Hundreds of candles burned along the aisles, their flames mirrored on polished dark stone, until the floor looked flooded with captive stars. Lenora stood in the antechamber, while Lady Vera fastened the last clasp of her gown. This dress was not charity, nor disguise, nor borrowed dignity. It had been made in haste from royal vault cloth, black velvet lined in garnet silk, severe in its elegance. With sleeves long enough to conceal the healing mark, and a train that whispered like rain across tombs. Her hair remained simply braided. No crown had yet touched her. You may still refuse, Maris said quietly. Lenora met the old woman's eyes in the mirror. Would refusal save anyone? Vera considered, then answered with the honesty Lenora had come to trust. No, that settled it. The doors opened. Music did not greet her. There were no violins, no wedding hymns, no sweetness staged to soften old violence. Only bells, low and resonant, tolling through the basilica as Lenora walked the central aisle alone. On either side stood the court. Some bowed, some did not. Some looked at her with outright hatred, others with reluctant awe. Lord Maris was absent. He had been sentenced before moonset. Cassivar stood beneath the transept in formal black, his amber eyes unreadable. Priests held silver censers aloft, and the smoke from them curled like pale ghosts beneath the rafters. At the far end, before the altar of carved black stone, waited Severin. He wore the crown tonight. Not gold, but dark metal set with a single red stone at the brow. It lent nothing to his authority, yet made visible what he had always been, not merely a powerful creature, but the center of law, grief, and kingdom. His wound had closed, though a faint dark line remained where the silver blade had gone in. He stood very straight, very still, and when Lenora approached, she saw that his composure cost him nearly as much as hers did. A priest spoke the old words, not of romance, of covenant, of witness, of bloodline acknowledged and obscurity broken. Lenora listened, as one might listen to weather announcing the season that would govern the rest of her life. When asked if she came under force, she answered no, because although fear surrounded every step, this choice was hers. When asked if she accepted royal protection under open seal, she answered yes. When asked if she understood that consort to the vampire king meant surrender of ordinary mortal future, children of sunlight, simple obscurity, unmarked passing years, her throat tightened. But she answered yes again. Then the priest turned to Severin. "Do you, Severin Dashan, king beneath the night crown, accept this bond under law and memory?" Severin did not look at the priest. He looked at Lenora. "I accept," he said, "under law, memory, and what I was once made to forget." The basilica fell silent. Even the candles seemed to lean closer. The priest lowered his gaze. "Then seal the covenant." This time there was no public accident, no violence interrupting ritual, no mockery twisted into revelation. Only choice. Severin removed the glove from his right hand and extended it. Lenora placed her hand in his. The marks on their skins flared together. A bowl of ceremonial silver was brought, not for severance. For union, the priest scored Severin's palm lightly, black blood welled. He offered the blade to Lenora. She took it, though her fingers trembled, and made a shallow cut across her own palm. Scarlet met black when their hands were joined over the bowl. The blood did not fall. It rose. Thin strands of red and black lifted like threads in moonlight, twining around their wrists before sinking beneath the skin. The old basilica shuddered. The obsidian windows flashed crimson. Somewhere far above, ravens burst from the roofline in a storm of wings. A murmur moved through the court. The bond had accepted. The priest brought forward the circlet prepared for a consort. Black silver, narrow, set with small dark garnets. Severin took it from the cushion. His hands, which could break a hunter's throat without effort, were careful as he set it upon Lenora's head. She did not feel transformed. She felt seen. And that, after all she had endured, was more terrifying than grandeur. The ceremony should have ended there, but the doors of the basilica flew open. A messenger stumbled in, soaked with rain and soot. "Your Majesty, East Quarter fire in the lower city. The regents, loyalists have opened the granaries and lit the streets. They're driving mortals toward the walls." Cassivar swore under his breath. The court broke into uproar. Some called it diversion, some called it revolt. Lenora looked at Severin and saw instantly what the others had not yet grasped. The attack was not only against the city, it was against the idea of her, a poor bride elevated. A forgotten line restored. Granaries opened, the very mercy Eline Vale had once intended to bring. The old faction would rather burn the lower wards than allow that memory to stand beside the throne. Severin turned to the court. "Seal the palace, muster the night guard." Lenora spoke before she could stop herself. "No," the word fell cleanly through the tumult. Every face turned. She felt heat rise beneath the new circlet, but she did not lower her eyes. "If they drive the lower city into fire while the court hides behind stone," she said, "then they win the story as well as the streets." Severin watched her, unreadable. She forced herself to continue. "My grandmother was hidden because she would have opened the granaries. Let them see this court do it now." A silence followed, dangerous, measuring. Then something changed in Severin's face. Not surprise, recognition. He looked at her as if the bloodline before him had ceased to be an echo and become itself. He turned back to the court. "Open the royal stores," he said. "Send guard and physicians to the lower wards. Any lord who refuses will answer to me by dawn." Some protested. He ignored them. He offered Lenora his hand again, not for ceremony this time, but for war. The lower city burned beyond the basilica doors, and together, king and newly crowned consort stepped into the smoke. By sunrise, the fires were out. The dead were counted in doorways and alleys, on chapel steps, near burst grain carts and blackened market stalls. Not enough to call it a massacre, too many to call it a mere riot. Loyalist nobles had fled or been dragged from hidden cellars before dawn. The city, exhausted and smoke-stained, watched from behind shutters as the king's guard moved through the lower wards not to punish the poor, but to feed them. That was the part no one had expected. Great bronze granary locks were broken under royal seal. Flour sacks passed hand to hand. Physicians from the palace treated burns in the same courtyards where children had once been taught to fear noble footsteps. Priests recited blessings over bread instead of corpses. And at the center of it, all walked Linora Vale beneath a black hood and a consort's circlet hidden in shadow. She did not move grandly. She moved as she always had, quietly, attentively, as one accustomed to noticing what others ignored. An old woman shivering by a wall received her own cloak. A boy with smoke in his lungs was carried into the palace infirmary because Linora stopped walking until someone took him. When merchants argued over ration order, she calmed them not by command, but by listening until they heard themselves again. The city began to understand what the court had not. Poverty had not made her lesser, it had trained her for mercy. Near dawn she stood in the ruined square of St. Orion, where the fountain ran black with soot and rose petals from some smashed shrine floated in the basin like bruises. Severin joined her there. His coat was scorched at one sleeve. Blood darkened one cuff, not his this time. The crown was gone. Without it he seemed more dangerous, not less, because kingship lived in him whether adorned or not. For a while they said nothing. Smoke thinned. Bells sounded the first hour. Somewhere nearby, a bakery lit its oven. The ordinary world, stubborn and miraculous, was beginning again. At court, Linora said at last, they will say this was political. It was, she almost smiled. I meant only political. A quieter expression touched him. Then they will be wrong. He looked toward the waking streets. Cassivar has already drafted decrees. The regent's surviving properties will be seized. The old seals that hid the Vale line were to be broken publicly at dusk. The regent's names would be cut from the rolls of honor and entered instead among the traitors. The surviving council, chastened by fire and witness, had already agreed to what they would never once have permitted in comfort, reform born not from philosophy, but from exposure. Linora listened without interrupting. The square around them had begun to fill with the pale light before sunrise, that haunted hour when the city looked less like a kingdom than a memory of one. Women with soot on their sleeves stood in bread lines that no guard now dared close. Men who had spent the night carrying buckets and bodies bowed awkwardly when they recognized Severin. Not because they loved him yet, because power had come down from the hill and bled where they could see it. Linora looked at the ruined fountain. Will they obey? For a time, Severin said. Fear teaches obedience quickly. And mercy, he turned his head toward her, more slowly. There was no vanity in him when he said it, only knowledge, too much of it. Linora studied his face in the thinning dark. He looked as he always did to the court, composed, elegant, impossible. Yet she had felt his pain in the crypt, his restraint in the chapel, his grief in every silence he carried like a second cloak. It changed him without softening him. Perhaps that was what made him most dangerous. Not that he lacked feeling, but that he had survived too much of it. A child approached them then, no more than 8, with ash on both cheeks and a loaf of still-warm bread held carefully in 2 hands. Linora knelt at once, though her body ached from the long night. For us, she asked gently. The girl nodded, wide-eyed, then looked not at Linora's hidden circlet but at the mark faint beneath her sleeve. My mother said you opened the stores. Linora glanced once at Severin. The king did. The child considered this with the grave seriousness of the very young. Then she tore the loaf in half and offered the larger piece to Linora anyway. Severin said nothing. Yet when the girl ran back to her mother, Lenora saw something pass through his expression so quickly another woman might have missed it. Not amusement, not tenderness exactly, something harder one. Hope, perhaps, or the fear of it. By the time they returned to the palace, the eastern sky had gone from iron to pearl. The black basilica stood open behind them. Priests moved through the nave, stripping away the last signs of emergency rite. In the courtyards, servants carried water, linen, ledgers, and sealed orders. The entire palace had the strained air of an old machine forced, at last, to move in a new direction. Cassivar met them at the lower steps. He bowed to Severin first, then, after only the slightest hesitation, to Lenora. "Your Majesty, my lady." She had not yet grown used to hearing either title in the singular, much less together. "The decrees await signature," Cassivar said. "The City Watch requests confirmation on curfew limits. The Treasury asks whether compensation for the lower wards is to come from confiscated houses alone or from the Central Reserve." "Both," Lenora said before Severin could answer. Cassivar's brows lifted. Severin, to his credit, did not so much as glance at her in surprise. "Both," he repeated, "and send word to the Western mills, bread at half price for 30 days. The crown will cover the difference." Cassivar inclined his head, though there was calculation in his eyes now, not resistance this time, recalibration. The court was already learning the shape of its new center. When he had gone, Lenora let out a slow breath. "He dislikes me less than yesterday." "He dislikes change," Severin said. "You merely arrived with it." That dry edge in him returned so rarely and so unexpectedly that it almost felt private. Lenora looked away too late to hide the small smile it caused. He noticed, of course. A quiet fell between them as they entered the inner gardens, the dead gardens, people had called them, but dawn had altered them. Frost still silvered the hedges. Statues still watched with blind stone patience. Yet the fountain channels had been reopened before sunrise, and thin dark water now moved once more beneath the iron bridges. Even the ravens seemed less like omens than witnesses. At the center of the garden stood the old yew tree that had outlived 3 queens and 1 civil war. Severin stopped there. Lenora stopped with him. For the first time since the basilica, no guards followed. No priests hovered. No courtier listened from behind carved screens. The silence around them belonged only to mourning and the long aftermath of survival. "You should rest," he said. "So should you. I have endured longer nights." "I know," she met his gaze. "That does not make you unbreakable." Something shifted in his face then, small, almost imperceptible, yet more intimate than any declaration. He had been worshipped, obeyed, feared, resisted. Perhaps he had seldom been spoken to as a man who could be wounded and remain worthy of being stayed with. A breeze moved through the yew branches. Lenora's hand lifted before caution could still it. She touched the fading line near his side where the silver blade had entered, not boldly, not possessively, only to acknowledge what had been paid. Severin went very still. "The crypt healers say the bond altered the wound," he said after a moment. "It would have killed another of my kind. And you, I am difficult to kill." "That," Lenora said softly, "I had already gathered." A shadow of something nearly like a smile touched his mouth, then vanished. But the moment did not. "The same healers," he continued, "cannot yet tell me what the bond has altered in you." Lenora felt her pulse change. The topic had waited behind everything else, patient as dread. "In what way?" His gaze lowered briefly to the mark at her wrist. "Whether it will lengthen your life, whether it will burden it. Whether the king's blood in a mortal covenant preserves, or merely ties more tightly." The honesty of it chilled her more than uncertainty itself. "You do not know." "No," he did not soften the word. "And I will not lie to soothe you." Strangely, that steadied her. All her life, comfort had come wrapped in concealment. "We will manage, it will pass, do not ask." Truth, even dark truth, felt cleaner. Lenora looked toward the waking city beyond the garden wall. Smoke still lifted in thin gray veils. Bells rang for morning bread. Somewhere a cart rattled over cobblestones. Life, unfinished and mortal, insisted on continuing. "At the hall," she said quietly, When you marked me, I thought I saw grief in you before I saw anything else." Matteo did not answer. She went on because this too had become part of courage, not boldness, but endurance spoken aloud. "I know now it was not only my grandmother, it was every year after, every silence. Every law you let stand because you believed forgetting was already done." His eyes met hers again, and in them she saw the full measure of that old guilt. "Yes," Lenora swallowed. "Then hear me clearly, I will not live here as another buried woman." Something fierce and reverent entered his expression at once. "You will not," he said, "not in history, not in court. Not in your silence." A long pause. Then he bowed his head, not as king to subject, nor even as bridegroom to bride, but as one solemn creature before another whose terms he accepted. "Not in my silence," he said. The words settled over the garden like a vow. Lenora had not realized until then how much she needed them. The sky brightened another shade. Dawn had nearly arrived in full. Soon the palace would call for them again. Decrees, punishments, ledgers, public witness, the endless machinery of a kingdom relearning its own conscience. But for one brief interval the world held. Severin lifted his hand. He did not touch her immediately. Even now, after blood and battle and covenant, he gave her that final space in which to refuse. It moved her more deeply than any claim could have done. Lenora stepped into it herself. His fingers came to rest against her cheek, cool and careful. She leaned into the touch before she could think better of it. The gesture was small. It felt enormous. "You are tired," he murmured. "So are you." "Yes," neither moved away. When he kissed her this time, it was quieter than the first. No shattered sigils, no court in flames, no bond exploding through stone. Only the grave, restrained tenderness of two beings who had found one another in the place where humiliation was meant to become erasure, and had instead made of it witness. His mouth lingered against hers with aching care, as if even now he understood that devotion could become violence if it forgot reverence. Lenora felt the answer to that care in her own chest, a warmth threaded with fear, yes, but no longer ruled by it. When they parted, the sun's first edge had touched the highest towers. Severin looked toward the light without flinching, though it would send him inward soon enough. "The court will call you queen by nightfall." Lenora followed his gaze. "And the city?" "Not yet," she nodded. That too was truth. Below the hill, smoke drifted from chimneys rather than burning roofs now. In the lower wards, bread moved from royal stores into common hands. In the archives, old names waited to be restored. In the hall of red glass, where she had been brought to be mocked, servants were already scrubbing away the last traces of blood. Some wounds would close, others would have to be carried. Lenora turned her wrist in the growing light. The mark there glimmered, still beautiful, still dangerous, no longer a sign of humiliation transformed by accident, but of memory made impossible to bury again. "Will this end?" she asked softly. Severin's answer came after a silence deep enough to honor the question. "No," he said, "but it will change." For a mortal woman and an immortal king, it was perhaps the only honest promise available. Lenora took it. Together they stood beneath the yew tree, while dawn entered the kingdom they had nearly lost. The poorest bride no longer hidden, the vampire king no longer permitted forgetfulness. And between them a bond born in public cruelty, tempered by blood, and carried forward not as a fairy tale's innocence, but as something rarer. A love grave enough to remember, dangerous enough to endure, and elegant enough to remain unforgot.